tons of fuel and water. The Mallet design allowed the development of powerful giants with 2 sets of driving wheels, which could do the work of 2 conventional locomotives. Railroad executives welcomed the technology to America in 1904, but laborers concerned about keeping their jobs were not enthusiastic.
These locomotives in some areas were resisted by the crews because the crews were being replaced 2 for 1. There are stories of crews not running them to their capacity just as a protest.
Another concern crews had about these locomotives had to do with their health. The problem was smoke. The cab where the engineer and the fireman ran the train was typically at the rear of the locomotive. Big locomotives produced so much exhaust that tunnels would fill with thick soot as the engine passed through. California's Southern Pacific lines traversed the steep Sierra Nevada mountains and had many tunnels. In 1910, the railroad purchased a unique Mallet-type locomotive with the crew's cab mounted on the front of the engine.
And the reason for the cab placement in front was the engine could operate without asphyxiating the crew in the tunnels, in the snow sheds up the high ridge of the Donner Pass in the Southern Pacific. Otherwise, in those snow sheds, the crews simply would have been overcome by the fumes. There was another railroad called the Western Pacific, and its locomotives were not the cab in front type, but they actually had to issue gas masks to the crew to be able to get through the tunnel. The Southern Pacific crews, on the other hand, appreciated those cab forwards because they didn't have that problem in their environment.
Railroaders were a hardy breed, but they didn't take to riding on the vulnerable front end of a locomotive.
After they overcame an initial resistance to riding out on the extreme front of a locomotive, just really loved them. These became world famous, and they were unique to the Southern Pacific. No other railroad found their use necessary, but they were a godsend for the Southern Pacific's mountain operations.
Mallet locomotives, like the Southern Pacific's early cab forwards, were powerful and efficient, but very slow. Engine designers sought better solutions for the next 40 years. A quiet man named Woodard was one of them. Woodard was born in Utica, New York in 1873, 4 years after the completion of America's celebrated transcontinental railroad. He graduated from Cornell University in 1896 with a degree in mechanical engineering and went on to work for the country's 2 largest steam builders. First the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and then the American Locomotive Company, ALCO. Woodard's solid reputation caught the attention of a small steam engine manufacturer in Ohio. Lima Locomotive Works saw itself as a giant killer. It had 2 things to sell: superior design and excellent workmanship. Lima lured Woodard away from the big companies by offering him the position of Vice President of Engineering. He accepted, and in 1916 set out to turn the little guys of steam into the scientists of steam.
Yes, I knew him. He was in the drawing office frequently. I was down in the lower ranks at the time, but he would berate me a little bit sometimes when he didn't like the design that I was working on. He had the ability to draw different devices and different planning and thoughts together. I think that's probably his greatest ability.
In 1922, Woodard developed a new approach to producing cost-effective steam power, one that offered more speed and higher horsepower. His superpower concept worked by burning fuel in a larger fuel box to make more steam. The new locomotive was easily recognizable. 4 trailing wheels were required under the cab instead of 2 to help carry the extra weight.
Lima had the superpower engine and had a very good spirit of the corps in the engineering department and was not afraid to risk a few things. They were forward-looking, and Lima, I think, took a very deep interest in giving the customer a locomotive that would perform.
Woodard's new locomotive increased horsepower by up to 25% and increased speed without significantly increasing operating costs, and railroad managers loved it. Lima vigorously marketed its superpower concept, making it one of the most universally accepted breakthroughs of the giant steam engine era. During his career, Will Woodard was granted over 100 patents for various railroad devices. When he died at age 68, he had risen to the rank of Vice President of Design and a Director of Lima. More importantly, the soft-spoken genius had earned the respect of an entire industry. By 1930, steam was a 200-year-old energy source. The 20th century ingenuity had turned it into the world's most productive tool. The railroad steam giants were the culmination of 2 centuries of advancement.
These were engines of 70, 80, 90 feet long, well over 100, 120 feet with the tenders, and just unheard of in size. They were just tremendous achievements.
Railroads made their money hauling freight and their reputations hauling passengers. By 1930, one of the most popular high-speed giants pulling passenger trains was the 484 Northern type, a superpower locomotive. Coal-burning Northerns consumed enough fuel in an hour to heat a 2-story house through the winter. Their billowing exhaust plume was easy to spot.
Well, the big Northerns, what made it real different was the fact that it was a high-speed engine. Of course, when you got on a 800 with a passenger train, you went like a streak, which was great.
Northerns were beautiful locomotives to watch. They whisked passengers across the rivers and prairies of America's heartland. But more challenges lay ahead for the steam giants. Endless tons of freight needed to be hauled over the nation's highest mountains. It seemed even the giants were about to reach their limit. They rise toward the sky with names befitting their majesty. The Wasatch, Blue Ridge, and Allegheny. Mountain ranges form some of the most difficult obstacles that America's railroads had to overcome. Conquering the mountains was why the largest and best-known steam giants were built. Steep grades, sharp curves, and inclement weather challenged a railroad's timetable, manpower, and ultimately its bottom line. A railroad manager based his operating strategies on the type of cargo he had to move. Coal and ore trains would literally crawl. Merchandise trains or fast freights had to move more quickly, and passenger trains had to fly. Schedules had to be met, and so did strict government and union labor regulations. Mountain districts often required multiple engines to handle a single train, and each locomotive pulling or pushing a train still had to carry a crew of 2 men. Operating one locomotive that could do the work of 2 cut labor costs in half. Owning the largest custom-built locomotives may have given a railroad's brass bragging rights, but more importantly, running the steam giants made economic sense.